There was a time when millions of families across America faced winter with little more than blankets, a drafty house, and, well, a bit of ingenuity. During the Great Depression, fuel was scarce, and heating bills were often impossible to pay. Yet households discovered methods to raise the warmth of a room without ever lighting a fire. These tricks weren't magic. They were clever uses of physics, materials at hand, and, good old human ingenuity. One such technique, preserved in diaries, household manuals, and oral histories, allowed families to trap heat, reflect it, and circulate it in ways modern homes often overlook. This method is not just history. It is a practical survival technique for anyone looking to maintain warmth off-grid during power outages or in cold weather emergency situations. Understanding how and why it worked gives us insight into the resourcefulness of ordinary people under extraordinary hardship. During the Depression era, families, they learned how to manipulate heat by using reflection and insulation. The central idea behind their trick was actually quite simple. The heat that already exists in a room can be trapped, directed and, retained for longer. Folks discovered that putting reflective surfaces near their radiators, stoves, or even lamps could really make a room feel much warmer. Often they used tin sheets, aluminum foil, or even just polished baking trays propped up behind radiators to bounce the heat back into the living space instead of letting it seep away into the walls. This method was especially effective in small apartments with just a single stove or in rooms where the windows were a bit drafty. These days, the very same principle is used in modern off-grid living. Even in homes with electric space heaters, placing a reflective barrier behind the unit stops energy from being wasted and, makes sure the warmth stays right where it's needed most. In practical terms, one could replicate this technique using inexpensive materials. For example, a thick cardboard sheet covered with aluminum foil serves as a cheap reflector. Positioning it a few inches behind a small heater or lamp creates a directional heat source without consuming additional fuel. The Depression-era ingenuity wasn't just about reflecting warmth. It was about making every calorie of energy count, a mindset that still matters for anyone practicing self-reliance today. Trapping heat with household materials was a key component. Depression-era households also relied heavily on insulating techniques. Rugs on the floor, heavy curtains at windows, and even tightly packed straw or newspapers behind walls were common measures. Every layer acted as a buffer, slowing the escape of heat and keeping a steady ambient temperature throughout the home. One particularly clever method folks used was hanging blankets or quilts in doorways, creating what they called thermal partitions between rooms. In practice, this stopped warm air from drifting into rooms that weren't being used, so you wouldn't lose precious heat to the cold. These days, modern survivalists can actually take this principle even further. They'll use things like sleeping bags, thermal curtains, or even foam insulation panels to recreate the same effect, just with a bit more modern flair. Another household trick, believe it or not, was all about furniture placement. Families would arrange their beds, chairs and tables close to sources of heat, making the most of that radiant warmth. Sometimes they'd even put metal objects out in the sun during the day, then bring them inside at night so they'd slowly release stored heat. Pretty clever, really. So, this is a direct lesson in passive energy storage, and it really shows that managing warmth often depends more on placement and material than on the heat source itself. The Depression-era trick was not limited to reflection and insulation, you know. Families learned to use convection and natural heat sources strategically. Even a single lamp, candle or small stove produced enough heat if air circulation was guided properly. Opening a vent at floor level allowed cool air to flow toward the heat source, warm up and rise naturally, distributing warmth across the room. Some households even created makeshift chimneys with cardboard or tin to channel the rising warm air where it was needed. The principle is simple, really. Warm air rises, cool air falls, and directing that movement can eliminate cold spots without any additional fuel. Another clever tactic involved moisture management. Depression-era families knew that damp air felt colder, so they used small stoves or even simple candles to gently reduce humidity, creating a perception of warmth. Modern survivalists can replicate this safely by ensuring proper ventilation while using small heat sources indoors, avoiding excess dampness that can make a room feel much colder than it actually is. By combining reflection insulation circulation and moisture control, households could achieve a surprisingly comfortable environment even when the mercury dropped far below freezing. Diaries from the 1930s describe rooms that felt cosy with only a single stove or lamp, and newspapers from the era provided detailed instructions on how to optimize room layout for heat retention. These principles are not outdated. They're, directly applicable to anyone looking to survive cold weather emergencies without relying on modern heating systems. The key is understanding that warmth can be manipulated with materials at hand, without additional fuel, by making small adjustments that really maximize efficiency. The Depression-era method of heating a room without fire reminds us that, necessity fosters incredible ingenuity. Families survived bitter winters through observation, experimentation, and the careful use of everyday materials. For modern survivalists, this technique provides an actionable roadmap to maintain warmth in off-grid or emergency situations. If you want more historically grounded survival guides and practical lessons from the past, subscribe to Backyard Wisdom, share this video, and explore how the knowledge of previous generations can make modern living safer and more self-reliant.